In my Super Mario Bros. Video, I stated that the 1980s were a wild time to be alive. However, it wasn't until the 90s where things became truly whack. Every big company wanted a platformer mascot. Nintendo had Mario, Sega had Sonic, and in 1996, Sony introduced the orange marsupial Crash Bandicoot. Released for the original PlayStation, Crash Bandicoot was one of the best-selling games for the system and became a commercial success. After 2 sequels and a racing game, the Crash series never really picked up as much steam until the Insane Trilogy released in 2017, and eventually a 4th game in 2020. Ever since the remastered trilogy's release, I've been pretty obsessed with the Crash Bandicoot series, even declaring the 4th game to be my favorite game of 2020. Therefore, what a better way to express my thoughts with this series than to make a video about it, starting with the original Crash Bandicoot. For this review, I played Crash 1 in the Insane Trilogy because my attempts to find a ROM of the PS1 game proved to be rather unreliable. However, this was my 3rd playthrough of the game, so I'm already quite familiar with the jumping physics and most of the levels. Also, playing the remaster version allows me to record crisp gameplay on my Series X, so that's a plus. My original playthrough back in 2018 on Xbox was a 100% run, so I didn't feel the need to endure that again for this review. Most of my thoughts about the game have remained the same since, including all of my likes and dislikes. I'll be devoting a section of this video for discussing the full completion experience, as I consider it to be a pretty important aspect of the series as a whole. And thus, let's begin. Crash Bandicoot. The gameplay of Crash Bandicoot is extremely simple. You can jump and spin. Most of the satisfaction received when playing this game comes from successfully performing a tight sequence of jumps, and when it feels good, it feels really good. Enemies and obstacles you encounter throughout the game usually have predictable patterns, with one of 3 options for dealing with them: jump on them, spinning them, or avoiding them. This keeps any sort of combat to a minimum and keeps the focus of the game solely on the platforming, making Crash 1 feel like a very focused experience. It excels at doing the one thing it sets out to do, and that's commendable. This even applies to the story, which is as bare bones as possible. Crash is a failed experiment of Dr. Neocortex and his assistant Dr. Nitrous Brio that escapes captivity. However, his partner Tawna doesn't make it out, so Crash must make his way back to Cortex's castle to rescue her. It's as simple as it needs to be, and I have no issues with it. Besides, if you're coming to Crash games for top-tier storytelling, then you're going to be thoroughly disappointed. Crash Bandicoot practically defined the corridor-style level design present in the series with a unique trick. Instead of moving from left to right like in a 2D platformer, change the perspective to behind the character, and now you're moving forwards in a 3D environment with additional left and right movement. As far as I'm aware, this is the first game to do something like this, and they only got more creative with the level designs in each future game. Levels are structured as a linear gauntlet of jumps from start to finish, with an optional collectible along the way, boxes. I'll speak more about these in the completionist section. A majority of levels contain special bonus stages that can be unlocked by collecting character tokens throughout the stage. These tokens can either be hidden in plain sight or within boxes. The bonus levels themselves can be tried an infinite number of times and typically reward a lot of 1-ups and 1-up-fruit, so they're worth going for even if you're not concerned with 100% completion. Plus, finishing one creates a checkpoint in the level, which is very valuable in later stages. One issue that pops up with the 3D perspective is judging the depth perception in certain jumps. It can often be hard to tell exactly where Crash is going to land after a jump, meaning you'll have to watch his shadow on the ground to get an idea of where he is. If you haven't learned how Crash's jump feels and how far you should expect it to go, you will die a lot from things like this. The problem can also be amplified if you're unaware of how Crash can stand on a platform, even if he's half off of it, which is an essential concept that players will need to realize for maximizing jump distance. The levels in Crash Bandicoot are broken up among 3 islands, with each one becoming more mechanized as you approach Neocortex's lair. You've got your jungles, temples, ruins, factories, castles, and the greatest level innovation yet: bridges. Crash 1's set of levels are great, and I have little complaints about theming. They all fit the island aesthetic well enough that I'm generally impartial to it. I'll briefly discuss each level, highlighting specific aspects that stand out to me for either being fun, difficult, bullshit, or a mixture of all 3. Insanity Beach is a great introduction level for teaching new players the basics of Crash Bandicoot with simple enemies and an easy box gem. Jungle Rollers has laterally moving objects that naturally ramps up the difficulty of the game. The Great Gate is the first 2D level of the game, which takes cues from other 2D platforms while putting its own Crash Bandicoot spin on it. Boulders is iconic and a great level. I also find it hilarious that someone legitimately got paid to name this level. Really racked their brain for that one, huh? Upstream is pretty cool, and I gotta say, Vicarious Visions did an incredible job with the water effects in this game. They honestly went so hard for no reason. Rolling Stones is a harder version of Jungle Rollers, but they're unfortunately not painted black. A truly missed opportunity. Hog Wild is another iconic level and the first to incorporate a rideable character, something that has become somewhat of a series staple. Native Fortress is a harder version of the Great Gate, plus they got monkeys here, which is pretty fantastic. Up the Creek is a harder version of Upstream. Again, the water pops off for no discernible reason. The Lost City is a pretty neat level with the walls that push you out, but the bad enemies are very cringe. Temple Ruins is a kick in the nuts and one of the less offensive dark levels. Have fun relying on your shadow to make up for the game's whack depth perception. Road to Nowhere is a baby version of a later level, so I'll save my thoughts for that notorious piece of ass. Boulder Dash is a harder version of Boulders, naturally making it amazing. Sunset Vista is a harder version of the Lost City, now with the dusk filter applied. Heavy Machinery is a certified banger and one of my favorite levels in the game. The factory theme is cool, and the jumps just feel so well strung together that it's a joy to play. Cortex Power has multiple paths to take, which makes backtracking for the box gem a nightmare. Generator Room is whack. Toxic Waste is one of those missions where you're actively fighting with the depth perception trying to figure out if one of those dumbass bouncing barrels are going to thwack you or not. The High Road is one of the most cracked levels in this game. High up on a bridge in the sky? Yup. Making precise jumps while bouncing off of turtles? Yes sir. God-awful depth perception? You bet. This level truly has it all, and it's one of the hardest levels in the game. Some people outright cheese it by walking along the bridge rope, but I'm a real gamer, so I do it legit. In all honesty, it's a pretty fun level, and its notorious status amongst Crash 1 levels makes it feel good to finally conquer. Slippery Climb makes you feel like a badass when you beat it, especially after getting the colored gem, which I managed to get accidentally while collecting footage for this review. Lights Out is straight dog water. Why do you lose the ability to see just from taking a hit? It's a major pain in the ass to play this one. Jaws of Darkness is a harder version of Temple Ruins, a level I'm already pretty mixed about. Thus this level is kinda garbage, with some awkward hidden routes to navigate. Castle Machinery is a harder version of Heavy Machinery, and therefore it is a certified banger much like its predecessor. The Lab is the most ass level in the game, no doubt. With the way that these doors and floors open and close, I feel like the game is actively trying to gaslight me, especially with this jump. Is there a pattern to this? Is it random? How the hell do I know? And this level has a colored gem? Just hot garbage, easily the hardest level in the game. Whole Hog is the first secret key level, and it's a harder version of Hog Wild. Just as much of a classic as its predecessor, but now with jumping on drums over large gaps of pits and obstacles. Fumbling in the Dark is the second secret key level, and it's a harder version of Lights Out. While it's not as bad as I remember it being, it's still quite foul. Surprisingly better than Lights Out though. The Insane Trilogy also introduces a new level that was cut content from the original game, Stormy Ascent, and oh boy this level is hard. I originally said that the Lab was the hardest, but Stormy Ascent is definitely harder. This is mostly due to it being substantially longer, with jumps requiring greater precision, which Crash 1 doesn't always excel at. This man likes to slide off of everything if he isn't 100% on it, and I feel like this is an issue in Stormy Ascent more than any other level. One other bonus level is the Great Hall, but it's nothing more than a completion reward with a secret ending. I'll discuss this later. And that's every level in the game briefly summarized. I'd say my favorite levels are Castle Machinery and Boulder Dash, with an honorable mention being Up the Creek. Damn, that water looks good! There's also a handful of bosses populating these islands that range from boring to simply decent. Papu Papu spins his spear in a circle around himself that you need to jump over, or you can just immediately jump on him after every attack and utterly ruin his life. Ripperoo jumps around a 3x3 grid of platforms in a specific pattern, and must be hit by TNT blocks timed to intercept his path upon explosion. Koala Kong throws rocks that you need to bait it until he throws one larger one that can be spun back to him. Pinstripe Potor shoots a Tommy gun at you that must be hidden from, which will occasionally jam or require a reload to allow for counterattack. Dr. Nitro's Brio throws different kinds of potions at you that either damage you or spawn enemies that can jump onto to deal damage to the boss. He also has a second phase where he drinks his potion and becomes the Hulk, requiring you to jump on him at the right time to defeat him. And lastly, Dr. Neocortex shoots different kinds of laser beams at you that either move across the screen in a straight or sinusoidal patterns, as well as a green color that can be spun back to deal damage. If it wasn't obvious by the descriptions of these bosses, there is not much going on in these fights. Most of the phases take way too long to get through, and I don't enjoy most of the bosses on repeat playthroughs. Papu Papu is the only one I like simply because of how free he is. The rest have too much waiting around and are just boring. Plus, dying close to the end of a fight means restarting it, which is soul destroying and feels like a massive waste of time. Crash 1 also has a soundtrack to talk about, though I don't really have much to say. Very few tracks stand out in my mind, although I would attribute this to the soundtrack just not really being for me. It's serviceable for the game and far from bad, but I typically prefer when games have more bombastic or exciting soundtracks, rather than the chill approach with Crash 1. The only tracks I remember off the top of my head are the main theme, the hog riding theme, and the factory theme played in Castle Machinery and Heavy Machinery. The Crash series as a whole is rather notorious for its insane completion requirements, especially with the newest game, Crash 4. Every non-boss level in the game comes with a certain number of boxes that rewards a clear gem for breaking them all. These boxes are scattered throughout the level and can sometimes be hidden in plain sight, or requiring a bit of exploration to find. Boxes are always located in bonus rooms too, so it's important that you're collecting the character tokens. Additionally, some levels will replace this with a colored gem that requires not only boxes to be broken, but also completing the level without dying in the same run. This will sound pretty familiar if you played Crash 4. There are also 2 secret keys to unlock by completing the Cortex-themed bonus rooms in Sunset Vista and Jaws of Darkness. These keys will unlock 2 bonus levels, each with their own box gems. A small issue that bothers me in every Crash game is the need to backtrack to earlier levels for colored gem routes. Some of the missions have special bonus areas with boxes that can be accessed by obtaining one of the game's colored gems. However, nearly every level you reach with these routes occur before the level with its respective colored gem. This means that you have to finish the level knowing you cannot get every box on purpose, earn the colored gem later, and then come back all the way to the original level to recollect all of the boxes and complete the special route. This issue persists in every Crash game, and it bothers me to no end. On top of these box gems, which by themselves isn't too bad, the Insane Trilogy introduces time trials to each mission. If you ignore the time trials altogether, your file will reach 100% completion, but beating them will push your percentage beyond that. These are by far the hardest completion challenge in the game. Some time trials require close to frame-perfect movement, and I honestly have no interest in attempting them. I've earned the Platinum Relic on the first couple levels, which took me a couple hours and multiple YouTube guides to get through, and I'm not about to try that on every level. Maybe someday in the future if I hate myself enough I'll give them a shot, but not for this review. Once every clear gem has been collected, you'll be able to access the completion bonus in the form of the Great Hall level. The secret ending provides small text blurbs about what each of the main bosses are up to following the events of the game, such as Ripperoo earning a doctorate, and Koala Kong receiving speech therapy. It's a simple yet fun reward that ties the experience together. Crash Bandicoot is a fun game that gets right to the point with its laser focus on platforming and completionism. Most of the boss fights are lame, but the strong set of levels with satisfying jumping gauntlets more than makes up for it. Although I'd consider this one to be the weakest of the main trilogy, it did an excellent job of establishing the formula that makes Crash Bandicoot games so damn fun. Thank you for watching. Native Fortress is a harder version of the Great Gate, plus they got monkeys here, which is pretty fantastic. What? Whole Hog is the first secret key level, and it's a harder version. Oh my god, fuck. I'd say my favorite levels are Castle Machinery and Boulder Das. Why do I keep saying Boulder Das? Dash, I'd say